Deciding whether you should move to Georgia or Florida can be a difficult decision, and there are a lot of factors to consider that may not be as obvious as you think. So today, I'm going to be looking at several factors to help you determine which is better for you. Now be sure to stick around till the end, because the very last one is the one that surprises most people, and it could be the reason that you choose one of these states over the other. The most important factor for many when determining whether they should move to Georgia or Florida is the economic component. So let's start with how your dollars are impacted by this decision. Now, it's widely known that Florida has no state income tax, but that, in and of itself, does not mean that Florida is better than Georgia. Now, of course, if you're a high-income earner or if you have large pensions or retirement accounts, then it could be a huge advantage for Florida. Georgia, on the other hand, has a state income tax of almost 5.5%, which is a big deal. However, Georgia's overall cost of living is the 26th lowest in the nation, while Florida's is higher at number 38. So is one of these states better than the other? Well, it really depends on where you live in Georgia or Florida. Georgia has more areas with a more rural lifestyle than does Florida, and rural homes do tend to cost less than those in urban areas. Although Florida has about double the population of Florida, Florida still has quite a bit of rural living. It's just not to the extent that Georgia does. Of course, rural areas on the outskirts of major cities like Atlanta, Augusta, or Macon may cost you more despite being rural. Although Georgia does have a large coastline, they certainly do not have the beach opportunities that Florida does. Now, of course, if you're buying a home on one of those beaches, then you're going to pay a high price for it. Because of the higher price of beachfront properties, the overall cost of living is skewed, favoring Georgia. But most Floridians don't live on the beaches, so from a macro perspective, it matters. But to most Floridians, the cost of beachfront properties is really irrelevant because so few people actually live on those beaches. According to Bankrate.com, the median sale price of a home in Florida was around $433,000 compared to just $388,000 in Georgia. Now, how much of that spread is due to the high cost of beachfront homes around major cities like, Miami, Fort Lauderdale, Tampa, and a bunch of others? I really can't be certain, but it's got to be huge. As such, I'm giving the economic factors advantage to Florida. Now, I suspect there are some economists out there. What do you think? Let me know below if you think I'm off base here. Next, if you're wondering if you should move to Georgia or Florida, the weather can be a difference maker. Now, everyone knows that Florida is big on hurricanes, and that's really just because of all those coastlines I just spoke of. However, Florida has nearly 8 times as much coastline as does Georgia, but less than 6 times as many hurricanes, according to a study by Universal Property and Casualty Insurance Company. And that's not all. Many of the hurricanes that do hit Florida end up in Georgia anyways. Now, while they may not have the wind power that they had when they landed in Florida, sometimes they're slowing down and dropping even more rain than they did when they sped across Florida. So at the end of the day, these hurricanes aren't really an advantage for Georgia. Florida's statewide average temperature is right around 70 degrees, whereas Georgia's is almost 64, so it's not that big of a difference, but it doesn't really tell us much. Along America's east coast, as you head south, temperatures tend to rise, but look, those ocean breezes can have a cooling effect. For instance, Key West, which is Florida's southernmost city, hasn't had a single 100-degree day since like 1871, according to NOAA, whereas it will hit 100 degrees in Atlanta, potentially a couple times each and every year. My wife and I spent a lot of time in central Georgia, and the sweltering heat has been worse than it was down in Florida. Now, the data says that Florida is hotter, but look, I just don't see a big difference between these two states. The flip side to Florida's heat is the Georgia cold. Georgia doesn't get a lot of snow, but they will get it occasionally, and look, it just doesn't get as cold in Florida as it does up in Georgia. Florida is known for its afternoon thunderstorms, but an article that I read, and I'll leave a link at the end of this video, it noted that Florida has an average of just 60 days of thunderstorms per year, whereas Georgia has an average of 80 days of thunderstorms. Now, it's important to note that Georgia and Florida are large states, so temperatures in these states can vary widely from one region to another. While I believe that I've made a case that Florida does have the better weather, Florida still has the brunt of the hurricanes, at least on the beaches. So I'm going to give Georgia the advantage here. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below if you disagree. Now, I'm confident that some will, but I'm curious about why you think Florida has better weather than Georgia. Both Georgia and Florida's economies have fared well in recent years. However, according to USnews.com, Florida is the state with the 7th best job opportunities in the entire U.S., whereas Georgia comes in at number 25. But look, like the weather, it's not as clear-cut as it may seem. It really depends on what job sector that you're working in. Additionally, the remote workplace can decrease the importance of this factor. Now, Georgia has surprisingly become a destination for the film industry, while Florida's hospitality, especially in the Central Florida area, has been a long-standing leader. Tourism is big in both states, but Florida clearly reigns supreme here. Given the overall job opportunities that Florida has, I'm giving Florida the advantage here. As we compare the culture of Georgia and Florida, we tend to see a bit of a divergence. Now, Georgia is truly a southern state. You know, sweet tea, grits, pecan pie are staples, and although friendly people in every state are abundant, it just seems like it's more culturally appropriate to smile in Georgia. Now, it seems like the people are a bit more friendly here. I'm sure there are plenty of knuckleheads in Georgia, and maybe it's just a personal stereotype that I have, but it just seems real to me. Florida, on the other hand, is not a southern state. Now, I know it doesn't make sense, but let me explain. Although Florida is further south, most of its inhabitants are Yankees, and myself included. A massive portion of Floridians are transplants from other states like, Michigan, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and many other northern states. In recent years, Florida has had a large influx of Californians too. Plus, Florida has a large Latino population. Down in South Florida around Miami, the Cuban population is huge. Here in Central Florida, where I live and work, we have an abundance of residents from Puerto Rico. This Latino population does impact our culture to some degree. Of course, larger cities may have a larger cultural influence, and Florida has more large cities than does Georgia. So if big city living is your thing, then Florida could be a better option simply because there are more big cities. So I've contrasted Georgia and Florida's culture, but the reality is that it doesn't really matter. There are plenty of great folks in both states, but they're generally similar from a cultural perspective. However, Florida does have a wider spectrum of cultural influence. As such, I'm giving the cultural advantage to Florida. Since so many retirees moved to Georgia and Florida, let's look and see how they fare comparatively. Now, retirees, like every age group in Florida, have no state income tax, and that's a huge advantage for retirees. However, Georgia is also thought of as one of the best states for retirees. Georgia's retirees' income, up to $65,000, is untaxed, and some low-income retirees may qualify to double their homestead exemption. With Florida having long been a retiree destination, Florida may have more retiree living options, and some would say that Florida has a better retiree infrastructure. But look, Georgia is an up-and-coming retiree destination. I've known a few over the years that have left Florida for Georgia, and the healthcare system was one of the reasons. Because the retiree benefits are similar to those of Florida and Georgia's lower overall cost of living, I'm going to give Georgia the advantage here. Before I get to the one item that surprises most people when considering a move to Georgia or Florida, if you're thinking of moving anywhere in either of these states, simply pick up the phone and give me a shout. Now, I work primarily in the Central Florida area, but I've got some connections with some great realtors in both states. Florida has long held a reputation for having poor schools. However, look, that old way of thinking is now being called into question in recent years. One example is USnews.com's ranking of the best state education systems, which ranks Florida as the #1 education system, whereas Georgia came in at number 26. Now, this isn't to say that Georgia's schools are bad when compared to other states. That would be crazy. But it more speaks to the improvement that Florida has made in this area in recent years. When it comes to determining the best schools, you have to do your homework and research the area that you are thinking of moving to. There's a lot of great websites that can provide a lot of insight into the local school systems. Now, I'm confident that Georgia and Florida both have great schools. You just have to do your homework and find them. Because of that #1 ranking, I'm giving Florida the advantage. As I record this today, Florida has the second largest number of Americans moving in the entire United States, and it's been among the top destinations for many years. However, Georgia comes in at number 7 on that same Census.gov study. As such, both states are thriving. For me, I'll likely never leave Florida. There are just too many things keeping me from leaving, but Georgia does have a lot to offer. What do you think? I'd love to hear your comments on why Georgia or Florida is better, so put them down below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.